The word history has kind of an odd spelling, don't you think? I know it's not polite to ask, but you were 96, is that correct?
That's correct.
It looks a lot like his story.
They were looking for people who could fly over Germany,
And in Marvin Edwards' case,
make a record of what the Germans were doing.
the two essentially mean the same thing. He dropped spies into Nazi Germany from a top-secret aircraft called the Mosquito. He photographed the bodies of people Hitler murdered. Were they starved beforehand?
Nothing. They got them in a field and then just said open fire.
And he almost never made it out of his 20s. Were you ever in danger?
Yeah, well, they gave us on the Mosquito flights what's known as poison pills.
Because you see, before there was a CIA,
If we were shot down and were alive and were surrounded by Germans,
there was the OSS.
we should take the pills so they couldn't put us through an inquisition.
It stood for Office of Strategic Services.
My last mission, the German SS were going to build caves in the Bavarian Alps, and after Germany's army and navy surrendered, they were going to continue the fight.
After the war, Edwards married. You referred to him as the rock star.
Yeah, he is my rock star. For many reasons, not only this.
It took years before Helene knew about his previous life.
It came out in bits and pieces. I didn't know all that I know now after 62 years.
And from marriage to retirement, Marvin, you have 3,000 books? Marvin has kept us informed,
Right, about 3,000.
and they're all nonfiction, as practically any intelligence analyst you'll find.
Yes, and there are books behind these books.
His links to the pulse of the nation and the world were well before now throughout his life. Like in the mid-70s, when he was one of the only economists in the country to predict a recession. Before that, he's saying we cannot win in Vietnam because he knew Ho Chi Minh, the former president of that country. Before that, he's touring concentration camps with Eisenhower. But perhaps his most prophetic words came in a newspaper he was writing in on campus as a teenager back in the 30s, before World War II, when he wrote this phrase: "A new world war is almost unavoidable with Hitler in power." Now, 80 years later,
At 96, I need a magnifying glass to read.
he wheeled in to tell a room full of friends another headline about the OSS.
Congress is awarding members of OSS the Congressional Gold Medal.
But that's where our story takes a sad turn.
He was doing fairly well,
His daughter Carolyn tells me it was mid-December when he had his fall,
but then he ran into some complications and things moved very quickly.
and little more than a month later, Marvin Edwards died.
Ma'am, on behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation.
At his memorial,
How do you find the words to describe your hero?
World War II was just part of the story.
I can find enough words to fill a book.
Edwards spent decades as a Jacksonville civic activist,
Dad often thought differently than the mainstream.
fighting against overspending by local government,
Dad was outspoken. He was threatened with violence.
and for ethics in City Hall.
Dad had a resume that would make anybody look like an underachiever.
But Marvin's story wasn't finished.
We are absolutely thrilled to be here.
In March, his children headed to snow-swept Washington, D.C.
We got a little extra for our money's worth. It's about 5 to 6 or 7 inches of snow.
to the heart of the Capitol building to accept Dad's Congressional Gold Medal.
Please welcome our honored guests, members of the United States Congress and the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
Pelosi, McConnell, and Ryan all showed up to say thanks
for their indispensable contributions to victory in World War II.
To around 20 OSS members in the room who served.
There is no higher honor that we can bestow here in Congress.
Under Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower. And is that exciting for you guys all these years later?
Are you kidding?
Bill Becker was friends with Marvin.
That's one of the most important things in my life.
He helped track down all these old spies.
After the war, I was instrumental in locating a lot of these guys, including Marvin.
And get them all to converge on Washington. Can you believe you lived through all this? Marvin knew.
Many times I've had so many close calls.
This would be another chance for us to see why they call it the greatest generation. Scott Johnson, Channel 4, the local station. The tragedy was roughly 2 years ago.
How did it happen?
How did it happen that he took his life?
Yeah.
Well, he took his life in the car in the garage.
With the exhaust?
With the exhaust, correct.
When this man, who we're not naming,
how's your granddaughter doing?
To essentially protect the innocent.
The first thing she said was, I didn't know I could lose a daddy. Oh, that's really hard to hear.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Died at age 52.
He even made a little recording that said he'd lost all hope and he loved you guys, sorry. So
those were the words he ended it with?
Exact last 4 words, love you guys, sorry.
But his father-in-law, who we're just calling Bob, did want to open up.
I've looked back hard to try to figure out what's the message you could say to the community to recognize that this is on the way for somebody.
Because this middle-aged dad is not alone.
We've come to learn that more men are successful on their first try than women.
It's middle-aged white men who are taking their own lives in increasing numbers. So consider some of the things middle-aged men are going through. They near retirement. The kids grow up and move on. Maybe they're getting older. Perhaps it can seem like life is shattering. What can replace it? A loss of purpose, loneliness, maybe depression. I got the idea to cover this story.
I think just knowing that this is a group that's vulnerable is a great first step.
After sitting down with Lori Osachi,
I think retirement or not being able to retire, they both are triggers.
A counselor at the Body Imaging Counseling Center.
It's hard to reimagine your whole identity.
She opened my eyes to the fact that families need to realize this group is as vulnerable as any.
A lot of times men have trouble asking for help in general or admitting they're in pain.
Take this study from 2015 by the National Academy of Sciences. This graph shows white males between 45 and 54 are dying more frequently than U.S. Hispanic men and men in other countries. 2 big contributors, drug use and suicide.
They tend to use methods that succeed. I hate to use that word, but they tend to use guns more, where women tend to use pills or, and it's easier to be found and be brought to the hospital when you've used pills than when you've shot yourself.
So what to do?
So to look for other signs that aren't verbal.
Osachi says watch.
Saying, I'm feeling suicidal.
And don't be afraid to recommend counseling.
When a person is suicidal, they're not rational.
Or even intervention.
You have to be very directive with someone who's thinking of killing themselves. So the first thing you do is make sure that, find out if they have a specific plan.
He came up with a long-term solution to a short-term problem, is the way I look at it, and passed his pain on to his family.
And that pain hasn't stopped, I'm sure.
Absolutely not. Now, he didn't mean to do that. All he was thinking about, I'm sure, was his own pain.
Bob only wishes they had known about the pain.
Healthy people don't take their lives. How do we tell he was going to and somebody else isn't going to? I don't know.
But eventually, it was too late. Tarek, this guy runs out of the Walmart with this register in hand. He's got a knife on him, goes up to one guy in a truck, gets a gun pulled on him. So he runs off to another car. Then that driver pulls a gun on him too. At that point, he just went to a bathroom and hid.